Chapter 12 Dragonstone. Hariel. Despite Bela's best intentions to cheer her up with some carefree dragon watching, the trip might have had the opposite effect, and upon returning to high tide it wasn't long before Hariel was ambushed by yet another difficult conversation. "I'd be a ward?" Hariel asked King Viserys for clarification. "Such as Lady Lena talked of when we first arrived to Westeros." Her mind was split between the unexpected offer and the argument with Aemond. Though Hariel was very aware Viserys was the king, and not the sort of monarch Queen Elizabeth was. Bringing that up here would be the most idiotic thing she could do, and at the end of the day, what business was it of hers? Hariel had her opinions about it, just like Aemond seemed to think her tainted too. "Yes, the situation has changed with the death of my good sister. In her stead, my daughter, Princess Rhaenyra, has offered to take you on as a ward at Dragonstone. A great honor," King Viserys said, smiling towards his daughter. With braided pale hair and sharp eyes, she looked strikingly similar to her younger half-siblings, just older and already a mother of three. Knowing what she did about the family's incest practices made Hariel even more focused on these similarities too. It was eerie. Their gazes locked momentarily, and the woman gave a tiny nod of acknowledgement, her violet irises assessing Hariel while she twirled the largest of the many shiny rings decorating her fingers. Amongst those Hariel was more familiar with, Lord Corlys and Princess Rhaenys stood silently with their son, while Daemon's expression was an unreadable mask. Hariel translated for Hagrid so he could have a say in this discussion too. "This is about the ward thing again, eh? You'd get an education, food and a good place to live. And you deserve that, Hariel. You should have been at Hogwarts learning with your friends, and I hate that I can't give that to you myself. If Lena's death makes it so we can't stay at Driftmark, we'll find somewhere else. But you're not going anywhere without me, Hariel. No way. I don't trust this lot enough to send you off without me. Make that clear to them." "We are very grateful, Your Grace, however," she said, peering swiftly from Hagrid, the unfamiliar crown princess, and back to the king. "What about Hagrid? I must go where he is." "He will come too. There are many more dragons at Dragonstone, and we'll get to keep caring for him there," the king said. "We will also build Rubeus Hagrid proper housing more befitting of his height and station at Dragonstone, in repayment for his services." Hariel wasn't sure how she felt. She traveled to Westeros with Daemon, Lena, Bela and Rhaena, but now they were being uprooted yet again. Well, Daemon stood right there, wordlessly agreeing with his brother. Then again, could he even argue against his king? Hariel was pretty sure he couldn't. Could she? If she wanted to stay in Westeros peacefully, then probably not. "It's a very generous offer, Your Grace," Hariel said, smiling uncertainly to Princess Rhaenyra, wondering what was in store for her now. She had at least talked with Sir Lenor, and the Vhagar incident had created a strange sort of camaraderie. But his wife? Hariel didn't know what to expect. Only a few days later, Hariel hugged the twins goodbye at the docks of Driftmark, about to board the king's ship to sail for Dragonstone. Aegon, Helaena, Laenor and Rhaenyra had flown ahead on their dragons, while the rest of the royals travelled by sea. The twins had volunteered to come see them off, but most remained back at high tide, where Hariel had said a proper farewell that morning. From the guards she'd made friends with, the maids, Lord Corlys and Princess Rhaenys, she'd even been able to track down Prince Daemon. "Farewells aren't necessary, Lady Hariel," the man said in that wry tone of his. "The castle on Dragonstone is more a home to me than Driftmark, and I'm taking Caraxes out later. Unless something comes up, I'll easily beat you to Dragonstone." "I wish you could stay here, but you're only an island away over at Dragonstone. It's a short trip, barely an hour by ship on a day with decent winds, and Grandmother said we'll be seeing you all the time," insisted Bela. "When Norbert is big enough to carry you, your first flight should be to Driftmark," suggested Rhaena. "That is a good idea. I will try to make it so." Hariel laughed and hugged the little girls in farewell. The twins could be such annoying little devils, but she'd undoubtedly miss them. Hariel was even getting wistful about not being woken by Tree Skipper climbing in through her window to inspect her ears anymore. "Or I will fly to you," Bela added, a challenge in her purple eyes. It had been a running joke between them, which dragon would grow large and strong enough to carry a rider first, Moondancer or Norbert. Norbert? Of course it'd be Norbert. But she didn't want to trample on Bela's optimism, and it didn't mean Ariel would be the first to fly either. Biting her lip, Ariel glanced towards Hagrid up on the deck. Hagrid was always bemoaning the madness of Targaryens flying the dragons, but that was the one advice regarding dragon rearing the royals chose to completely ignore. So though Hagrid couldn't stop them from riding dragons, Ariel was different. Norbert was his dragon, his baby, and he had gotten very protective of Ariel in the last year as well. Even if Norbert was willing to carry her, would Hagrid even allow her to fly the dragon? Until then, Father promised we'll get to visit you and our cousins, maybe even stay for a while at Dragonstone, but you're welcome here too. You know you are, said Rayla. Ariel smiled bravely despite wishing she could stay. She knew Lord Corlys had suggested they remain at Driftmark with Ariel as a ward of his wife, but King Viserys had decided they should go with his daughter, and as an absolute monarchy, the king always had the final say, especially in matters regarding dragons and his own family. Still, Princess Rhaenyra was a stranger, and Ariel wasn't even sure the woman liked her much. The twins were right. The voyage between Driftmark and Dragonstone wasn't even long enough for Hagrid's seasickness to kick in, and within the hour Ariel watched the volcanic island rise like a grey crown on the horizon. Soaring above the ship, Norbert gathered speed and set off at full flight towards the island. While Aemond and Jacaerys remained within the cabin with the king and queen, Otto Hightower and that creepy guy with a cane sat to the side of the deck talking. Prince Lucerys was on the deck too, watched mindfully by Sir Carl. The dark-haired boy pointed excitedly, his words too fast for Ariel to have a hope of translating anything, and then he grinned over at her. Lucerys gestured to the island and started speaking slowly and clearly, having been reminded about 50 times by Sir Carl in the last half hour that she struggled with common tongue. Unfortunately, none of Princess Rhaenyra's sons could speak Valyrian. "Do you see him? Araxes is flying! My dragon Araxes!" Lucerys said carefully enough Ariel understood the simpler sentences, while pointing at a small bright dot in the sky. It probably was a dragon, though Ariel was impressed the boy would recognize it as Araxes from such a distance. It looked more like a flapping pale blob in the grey fog. "I do," she answered in common tongue. "At Dragonstone, Norbert will not be alone. She can play with Araxes and my brother's dragon Vermex too," the little prince said, and this time Sir Carl had to translate a few words for her, making Ariel's stomach do a somersault when his dark doe eyes were directed at her. "That will make her very happy. I hope Norbert and Araxes will be the best of friends," she said. The 7-year-old was actually very sweet when he wasn't being hyperactive. More often than not, Lucerys and his older brother Jacaerys were like two passing whirlwinds, playing hide and seek or running around with wooden swords. Sir Carl conveyed her words to Lucerys, who smiled toothfully, looking pleased with himself as he ran off. Ariel tilted her head back, watching the clouds and thinking that as long as Vhagar didn't decide to visit Dragonstone, she'd manage well enough. She needed a little longer before her anger cooled off. Castle Dragonstone shared its name with the island it was built on, and was the original seat of House Targaryen, situated below an active volcano named the Dragon Mount. It was also a castle unlike any Ariel had seen before. Dragonstone had a castle yard, its own library, and there was a fishing village with a port beneath its curtain walls. Dragon architecture was carved into the stone consistently throughout the castle. From small dragons framing the gates, dragon claws holding torches, dragon tails shaping the archways and staircases, and a pair of great wings covering the armory and smithy. The citadel of Dragonstone was wrought all of black stone. Doors were set in the mouths of stone dragons, while gargoyles and grotesques served as brooding crenellations along the curtain walls. Designs included basilisks, demons, griffins, hellhounds, manticores, minotaurs, and more creatures Ariel hadn't the hope of naming. "I think they've got you beat, Hagrid. House Targaryen likes dragons even more than you do," Ariel said on their guided tour being escorted to their rooms. Overall, it was eerie and grim, and Ariel hoped she'd get accustomed to the smoke and brimstone smell sooner rather than later. There was supposed to be a welcoming feast. The king was on Dragonstone and that was a big event, but everything was being overshadowed by a larger issue happening on the island. which required most of the dragon riders, including Daemon, Rhaenyra, Laenor and Aegon. She didn't know why before being invited to join Helaena and Aemond for a walk through Aegon's garden, a large park with tall dark trees, towering thorny hedges, wild roses and cranberries. After a quick clarification, Heriel learned the garden was definitely not named for their older brother, but Aegon the Conqueror. Heriel became rather fond of it though. The pleasant pink scent masked some of the sulfur smell hanging above the island. "There's been an accident," Princess Helaena explained, wringing her hands. Since she'd flown on Dragonback, the princess had already been settled at the castle by the time Heriel arrived with the boat. "They are moving Joffrey's dragon to Raxis somewhere more secure." "I thought the Raxis was small," Heriel said. "Why would so many be required for that?" "The Raxis is very small, even smaller than Ebrion, but a cannibal ate the dragon Numio," she said, looking carefully at her brother. "The dragon riders are needed to shepherd Cannibal back to his lair." "But is it not a very dangerous dragon?" Heriel asked. She'd heard several tales of that dragon. They said it was even larger than Vhagar. "It is, but we've been able to control him before. Since the cannibal does not eat grown dragons, only young ones," Helaena explained as they came to a stop by a rose bush. She reached into it, mindful of the thorns, and picked a lustrous bright red flower. "He is dangerous, but his great size makes him slow and lazy. They expect him to retreat against so many grown dragons." Heriel still worried, and yet simultaneously wondered why Helaena wasn't part of this. Dreamfire was older and bigger than Rhaenyra, Laenor and Aegon's dragons. Maybe it wasn't about who had the bigger dragon though. Helaena was many things, and among those traits was gentleness. Helaena sighed, carelessly tearing the rich red petals apart to get at the little worm inside, which she handled with great care. "It is bad tidings though, because father intended for Aemond to bond with Numio." "There are more dragons here than Numio, and Aegon told me it was a runt, slow and barely the size of a dog at 4 years of age," Aemond said tightly, folding his arms. "I want to claim one of the older ones. I heard the handlers talking. Silverwing is nested on the west side of the Dragon Mount. That isn't too far." "After Vhagar, neither father or mother will allow you to approach an old dragon such as Silverwing," Helaena said, gesturing to the night trailing behind them. Heriel didn't know his name, but he was a Kingsguard and had been shadowing Aemond's every step since they docked. Probably ordered by the king himself to prevent the prince from repeating his disappearance act back at Driftmark. "How come you are so impatient for a dragon bond? Lady Laena was 3 and 10 when she bonded with Vhagar, and Prince Daemon was 5 and 10 with Caraxes. You are only 10. There's plenty of time." "My 1 and 10th name day is in a moon," Aemond corrected. "Helaena was 10 when she claimed Dreamfire. I will not be the only Targaryen without a dragon." "But you are not," Heriel said, wondering why everyone was under the misconception he was. It was like a cloud of shared amnesia between everyone, and it was perfectly clear that the king is dragonless too. "Our father's dragon was Balerion," Prince Aemon said in a tone that indicated Heriel was an utter dunderhead. "That was 5 and 20 years ago," Heriel pointed out in that same tone. According to what Daemon explained, Balerion died barely 2 years after Viserys bonded with him, before the man was even crowned, became the only Targaryen king to sit the Iron Throne who wasn't a dragon rider. "The king has remained as dragonless as you ever since. Count your blessings instead, as you are still able to claim a dragon in the future, Prince Aemond, whilst the king will never fly again." Heriel did not see any of the other dragon riders until the next day, when she went to meet Princess Rhaenyra for tea in the Sea Dragon Tower, where Solar was located. The twisting layout of the castle was still unfamiliar to her, but fortunately a maid named Aliza with silver hair and bright purple eyes, who Heriel had at first mistaken for another Targaryen, was kind enough to show the way. They walked through the holdfast to a narrow and twisting turnpike stairs leading to Rhaenyra's apartments, halfway up the tower shaped like a dragon gazing serenely out at the Blackwater Bay. When she arrived, the princess already had company. How have you been settling in at Dragonstone, Lady Ariel? Prince Damon asked. The prince leaned back in a richly decorated chair by the windows, legs crossed and tapping the armrest lightly with his fingers. He talked with that arrogant confidence which made Damon look as if he owned any room he entered. But Ariel also thought he seemed rather comfortable in his niece's chambers, more at ease than he'd been anywhere at Driftmark too. I think it has gone well, Prince Damon. Norbert got along with Erix and is a little competitive with Vermax. She says he is arrogant, though I don't think Norbert should call others arrogant when she is so proud herself. But no accidents has happened. Hagrid likes it too. The ceiling is much taller here than at Driftmark. Damon chuckled and Princess Rhaenyra's eyes twinkled amused. May I ask how it went with the cannibal? I was told by Princess Helena you flew out. It took most of the day, but we succeeded without more bloodshed, Princess Rhaenyra said. Her Valyrian wasn't as fluid as Damon's, but from what Ariel had heard, the princess had never lived outside Westeros, and each word was precise and clear. It was a most unfortunate accident. Numio was intended for Aemond, and it is surely a great disappointment for him. Take a seat, Lady Ariel. As my ward, we've got much to discuss. Your new duties not the least, but I also wish to get to know you better, the princess said. Damon has told me much of yourself and Rubius Hagrid. Though it probably looked similar on paper, being a ward of Princess Rhaenyra was different from their time at Driftmark. Ariel still spent time with Norbert and Hagrid daily, while the rest was divided between different activities. It was just that all those activities grew more intense. Maester Geraldis was in charge of teaching arithmetic, geometry, language and history to Rhaenyra's sons, and Ariel's added as his newest student, though in the beginning they focused on Common Tongue alone. The hours spent learning language was probably the hardest subject, but also the most useful, while her other lessons were more dubious, such as the womanly arts taught by Septa Mega, with some input from the princess whenever she had the time. Ariel had foolishly hoped Princess Rhaenyra was less intense in these arts than Lady Lena, but it wasn't to be. Princess Rhaenyra was a doting and loving mother to her sons, but she was not what anyone would call a warm or affectionate teacher. She wasn't outright mean, not as hateful or spiteful as Snape, but she had little patience for mistakes, and possessed a sharp tongue. She could insult Ariel to her face for making a blunder, but as long as she corrected it quickly enough, Rhaenyra didn't hold it against her either. And at first week at Dragonstone, Ariel made a lot of blunders. In truth, Lady Lena had already started most of these lessons with Ariel, but Lena had made it seem closer to friendly advice and helpful talks compared to the policing she got from Septa Mega. Apparently, a lady of Westeros was required to know how to dance, sing, play an instrument, embroider, sew, write and be taught spiritually by Septa Mega, though that last part would wait until she knew Common Tongue better. In the meanwhile, Ariel had more than enough to be going on with. There wasn't a predictable schedule either. Instead, the lessons were set whenever the teacher had time. If it was at the crack of dawn or in the middle of supper was up to them, along with how long each lesson lasted. Ariel never knew if there was just a few minutes left or 3 hours. Is Hagrid being told these things? Ariel had asked on her third day with Princess Rhaenyra, after being admonished for acting too friendly with the maids. Elisa had been great to Ariel though. The woman was always busy but still took the time to show Ariel the ways around the confusing castle and explain who to ask for certain things. For Ariel may not know all the nuances of the absolute monarchy, she'd have to be blind and stupid to not get the broad strokes. Westeros was downright medieval, but Ariel refused to treat Elisa the way the Dursleys treated her just because she was only a maid. It is true Hagrid has been reminded, but as a man his disregards are easier to forgive than yours, Rhaenyra answered. All it takes is one misstep, Lady Ariel, and your reputation will be ruined forever. As my ward you have become my responsibility, and your actions reflect upon me. Though I understand your homeland had a different approach to these matters, you are in Westeros now, under my roof. By all means be as kind as you please with the servants. I do not fault your kindness, but I urge more caution. Regardless, never again invite a maid to lunch. The servants already get their pay from my purse, and that is my food you're squandering. The princess wasn't truly like anyone Ariel had met before, but if she absolutely had to compare Rhaenyra to anyone from Hogwarts, it was probably Professor McGonagall. If McGonagall had been a dragon-riding princess and carried the entitled behavior that came with being the heir to 6 kingdoms. Rhaenyra was spoiled too, but then who wasn't around here? Daemon was the biggest drama queen Ariel had ever met, including Aemon to the dragon-obsessed pyromaniac himself. And Princess Helena was sweet, but the girl wouldn't know how to get dressed in the morning without at least 2 maids at her disposal. Which was ironic because the younger princess was actually very good at making clothes, just not putting them on. Aegon's drinking was alarming, and so far Ariel had seen him drunk more often than sober. Though he could be charming in a cocky way, the teenager became very unpleasant under the influence. Like the time Aegon came across Ariel on her way back after dinner with Daemon and Hagrid, and Prince Aegon had not so subtly asked Ariel to "Come and have a good time in my chambers. We can have a bit of fun together, Lady Ariel." He'd grabbed her hand, and the alcohol on his breath made her grimace. His suggestive tone left no room for misunderstandings either. Initially, Ariel tensed up, her mind whirling between which spell would get the prince off, but maybe resorting to magic was to escalate things too fast here. "Do you mean like a board game? Does this invitation extend to Hagrid as well?" Ariel asked tightly, playing dumb while tucking her hand out of his grip, but he held firm. "He's still with Prince Daemon, but the two should be right out." Considering how fast the boy disappeared after that, you'd think he had an invisibility cloak too. By day 8 on Dragonstone, Ariel felt stifled, and when she woke up that morning decided she needed a break. Technically, she didn't do anything wrong. Ariel didn't have anything scheduled before the dreaded music lesson in the late afternoon, and she needed to do something fun before that hell started. She had a good idea in mind too. Ariel had been learning to ride horses in Pentos, when Prince Regio had gifted Hagrid a dark destier, so going to the stables to visit the horse that had been affectionately named Budbo by Hagrid wasn't against any rules. Since Budbo couldn't carry Hagrid, Ariel had used the proud warhorse to learn to ride instead. He was huge and didn't have the easiest temperament for a first-time learner, but Hagrid insisted it was tamer than a hippogriff, so Ariel wouldn't know if it was accurate or not, having only seen a hippogriff as a picture in a book. Saddling Budbo and taking him out for a ride around the castle was acceptable, to be expected even. While riding around the castle, she happened to notice that all the gate guards were absent too, and since it was unusual, she went to investigate, but there was no one there. Since she'd come this far, why not go a little bit further? Why not venture into the village? The castle was within sight, so it'd be fine. Riding further out of the village though? Well, Budbo would enjoy the wide open hills more than the narrow village streets, wouldn't he? There was a guard at the outskirts of the village, but she handled him well enough. "Lady Ariel, you're riding out too. Where is the rest of your party?" She hadn't met this guy before, so did that mean the people here already knew her by appearance alone? That was almost like Hogwarts. "I'm going alone today," Ariel answered happily, riding right past the guard before he could object. He called something after her, but she chose not to hear, because it hadn't included "stop" or "you can't do that," so it was alright. No one had specifically told Ariel she wasn't allowed to ride around Dragonstone, had they? Maybe Lord Corlys had said so at Driftmark, but not here. Lord Corlys had probably said that because back there Ariel rode alongside the twins, and they were only 8 while Ariel was 13, so she was much older. If she could travel between worlds, surely she could handle one measly island, no matter how many dragons dwelled there. 4 hours later, Ariel was still riding Budbo, and had long ago lost any semblance of a trail. Ariel couldn't make herself care though, too caught up in exploring the landscape and enjoying her first break from all the hustle and bustle at the castle. There had been a couple dragons flying by overhead, and one stirring at the top of the volcano crater, but otherwise their only company were birds, rodents and insects. As a warhorse, Budbo was bred to ride carrying a man in full armor, and Ariel was a fraction of that weight. He made a great traveling companion though, strong and opinionated, but Ariel thought she handled him pretty well, since even at his worst the horse was 100 times easier than Norbert. So Ariel switched between steering Budbo along a casual walk, to trotting, to cantering, until she was sore. She decided to climb down from Budbo's back so he'd get a break as well. Since there weren't any nearby streams, it wasn't ideal. That could be easily fixed by a witch. Aguamenti, Ariel said, and made her wand into a fountain spray. Once the horse understood what was happening, he came forwards to drink greedily from the magical stream. Ariel hummed as she patted his mane, feeling the warmth under his coat and running her fingers through the black hairs. As they'd set out from the castle right after dawn, it had soon been noon, and she still had a few hours left before her lesson with Septa Mega. Ariel was not looking forward to that. The singing wasn't too bad. Ariel would never be a renowned singer, but she was acceptable. It was the instrument that was killing her. Ariel had zero talent with the harp, and all her lessons to rectify the matter had been a travesty. Ariel had started to walk back, using the larger landmarks as a guide. As they trotted along, Ariel took advantage of the freedom and whipped out her wand to practice her spells. Engorgio, Ariel murmured, pointing at a stone that expanded to 10 times its size. Budbo stopped to inspect it, but deemed it safe enough to walk over. Reducio. Ariel aimed at a bush, which minimized. Fumos. A cloud of smoke spewed from her wand, making Ariel grin. Colovaria. The leaf she targeted was supposed to turn from green to purple, but ended up a patchy bluish. Colovaria. She tried several more attempts until her bad results made her try something she knew would work and bolster her confidence again. Holding up her left hand, Ariel pointed her wand into it and said, Aura Inflammari. Hermione's bluebell flames erupted from the wand tip and gathered into a blue fiery ball resting snugly in the palm of her hand. It tickled her skin, warm and bright. It didn't hurt like true fire, but Ariel was careful to keep it away from Budbo anyway. Fire spells might be crossing the line for what even a horse would find acceptable. She'd noticed he tensed, but a moment later so did Ariel. A large dragon appeared in the clouds, making Ariel freeze in her tracks, the blue fire in one hand and her wand in the other, while her heart began drumming faster and harder. It was huge, and she could only think of one dragon of that size. Vegar. Crap. Budbo was not unfamiliar to dragons. He'd been slowly acclimated to Moondancer, Vegar and Caraxes back in Pintos and lived on Driftmark with the fire-breathing species too, but as the dragon neared he was doomed to get spooked. It was at this point Ariel remembered that for the last 10 minutes Budbo had been following her without guidance. She wasn't holding his reins, and so there was absolutely nothing stopping Budbo as he took off at a panicked gallop. Budbo! Budbo, no! Come back, Budbo! Ariel shouted, terrified the massive dragon would see the fleeing animal as prey, but even if it didn't, that was her right! With a huge dragon closing in, Ariel couldn't really focus too long on the horse foe, and she whirled back to the main threat. She could tell Vegar would land close by, but if the dragon thought Ariel would be complacent a second time, she had another thing coming. The dragon landed with a heavy thud, the ground trembling, and it was then that Ariel first realized her mistake. It was huge, but on the ground she could immediately tell something was off. The first thing that stood out was the wrong color. Vegar was green, but this one was brown with a reddish tint, almost copper. Or bronze? The scaly skin showed far less age and the face had a spiky beard and long horns. If she wasn't mistaken, this dragon was actually a size smaller too. It was unquestionably enormous, larger than Caraxes, Dreamfire and Meles, but not quite as enormous as Vegar. It also had a silver-haired rider seated on its back. Ariel stared, her shock striking her so hard it disrupted her spell, and the bluebell fire in her hand puffed into smoke. Aemond? The boy had to bend at a very uncomfortable angle to see around the neck of his dragon, but he managed. See? I told you I was ready for a dragon! You... who the hell is this? Vermithor, the dragon ridden by King Jaehaerys himself. My great-grandsire. He's mine now. I claimed him. Congratulations on bonding with Vermithor? she said, not really sure what was the correct response to this. It was absurd though. Aemond was so tiny compared to the dragon, like an ant riding a dog. Ariel shook her head and had to shout to make the boy hear her properly all the way up on his dragon. I hope you're happy with your mount, because you spooked away mine. Now I have to walk back. It'll take all day. If I get in trouble with Princess Rhaenyra for missing my music lessons, I expect you to straighten it out with your sister. Aemond only laughed, something she'd never seen him do before. Ariel took in the grey dragon. It was sniffing the air around her and rolled his shoulders, stretching out after the flight. Why had it come here? Could it be because of her magic? Maybe she should keep that in mind while staying on an island filled with dragons. Because if that was why, it could have been the cannibal flying in, couldn't it? Wait, did Aemond say this was Vermithor? That was one of the dragons who understood Parsisaltan, wasn't it? Vhagar claimed so. Ariel moistened her lips, and when she tried to switch her language, she found it more difficult than usual. The spiked face didn't much look like a snake, but she had enough practice to get around that. Hello, Vermithor. The dragon had been adjusting, trying to find a comfortable way to stand with his colossal size, but stopped at the sound of Parsisaltan. A speaker? Vermithor's voice was as raspy as Ariel expected of dragons, but much deeper than the bone-grating speech of Vhagar. How curious! He sniffed the air again, a puff of smoke erupting from his mouth. You smell like dragon, Vermithor said. You feel like Valyria. Ariel opened her mouth, wondering what she was supposed to say next. It's nice to meet you, Vermithor. Because it rarely hurt to be polite, did it? Nice. What does this word mean? Good? Good. You said good to meet me. Why? It sounded like a genuine question, but before Ariel could form a response, the dragon kept on talking. It is a good day though. I took a new pet. It has been long since my last, but he gave me food, climbed on my back and won't let go, so I took him to fly. My pet liked that. Vermithor continued speaking, making Ariel wonder if he was just babbling whatever thoughts came to mind, relevant or not. I ate a horse today too. It was good. Yes, it is a good day. So that makes it good to meet you too, speaker, he said, wording his train of thoughts aloud and bouldering Parsisaltan. The mention of eating a horse made Ariel look over her shoulder, but Budbo was already far off, though Vermithor could probably catch up. It sounded like he'd already been fed though. Did that mean Aemond fed his horse to Vermithor? The dragon swallowed as if his throat was a little sore, and smoke billowed out of his nostrils. I will go see Silverwing. She will like my pet too. The pet is mine, but Silverwing can look. And that was that. Vermithor relaxed, having met, assessed and spoken his verdict through that little rambling speech of his. It left Ariel with the strangest impression. If Caraxes was like a poisonous snake, Vhagar a cranky crocodile, and Sunfire an overconfident horse, then Vermithor was more like a... well... Ariel wasn't sure what. It might be too early to cast a verdict, but so far he'd shown the lackadaisical temperament of an oversized turtle. Aemond looked quite impatient though. What did he say?